Hello everyone, this is Edwin, Splinter on TTA Pulse, and I stream on Twitch under the handle The Splendid Splinter. I'm here to talk about a topic that I feel is very complex and could span multiple videos depending on the feedback I get. I hope to at least open your eyes up to some of the mistakes you might be making in this area and to demystify some of what makes a good decision in this area. I hope this helps. The main thing I want you to learn from this is that seeding events and not seeding is very gray. There is very few black and white decisions when it comes to this. There's a lot of calculated risk, and I encourage you to try different things. If you find yourself always deciding not to seed, throw some out there. But if I were to guess, and I put it on the second bullet, most people seed too much. There are a lot of reasons not to seed, especially early on, and we're going to talk about those reasons. However, to play devil's advocate, if you are not seeding enough, it is a much harder mistake to catch without video review or having a good player go over the game with you. Because when I play games against someone, I notice when they seed too much, or I notice an event that pops up later in the queue and I go, you know what? They probably should not have put that in the queue. So from my side as the opponent, I can catch the mistake that people make when they see too much, but not the other way around. So I just wanted to point that out. 3 things to improve in this area. Know the events. Have a purpose and embrace the variance. Let's dig into these. All right. Makes sense that as you play this game, you start memorizing all the cards. And through sheer brute force of playing multiple games, you will get familiar with them. I feel most people do know the Age A events. However, do you know them all in detail? Did you know that there are 11 events that could pop up? And do you know how many events provide rock? How many events provide science? And how many events provide food? Etc., etc., etc. This will be important. So in going through the cards, this is kind of like a cheat sheet, but I feel that everyone has an intuitive sense of Age A. Everyone knows that there are 2 rock bonus events, but I feel like maybe something more interesting would be bullet C, events that add corruption, right? So they're all +2 multiples. It could be 2 rock, it could be 2 grain, it could be a grain and a rock from trade routes. But it's very important to plan out your turn ahead of time. And sometimes you take a very tight turn. So what I mean by that is you take a turn and you look at your corruption and you barely made the window. You barely avoided corruption. You did everything perfectly and you look at the end of the turn, no corruption. If you seed here, 36% of the events that you seed add corruption. So I would encourage you to take advantage of the app's feature of undoing. And if you are planning a turn that requires every action and doesn't have a lot of wiggle room to avoid corruption, I would encourage you not to seed and to test it out. This could prevent a lot of heartache because it can change the course of your turn to seed a corruption event, or to reveal a corruption event rather. Okay. The last thing I have to say is, and I apologize for skipping around. In bullet A, the religion event, I think, is far more valuable than the warrior event. So what I mean by that is that early in the age, your priority is to generate production both in your mine and your lab. Getting a warrior event early means that you will have a food happiness problem in putting a worker into a mine or lab if you decide to take the warrior event. So there will be times where taking the warrior event might not be ideal, but the religion event is always good. The religion event is a considerable bonus and could end up adding 13, 14 culture over the course of the game, depending how early the religion comes. So that is no joke, and if you're playing a tight game, it can decide the game. So missing the religion event, I feel, is a big deal. Okay, let's go to the Age 1 events. Little breakdown if you have not familiarized yourself with every card. There are 48 cards total. And from a tactics point of view, the main thing is that all of them come in pairs. So getting a full pair of tactics removes that possibility from your opponent unless you decide to show it and they copy it. This can be very powerful information, especially with tactics like Medieval Army and Fighting Band, which I consider to be the two best Age 1 tactics that you can get in the game. The reason I think that Fighting Band is better than, say, Legion is that it's more flexible for colonizing. So the tactics that require 3 men are not very practical for colonization because you never really want to throw 3 people away in most circumstances to a colony. Also, the 7 defense cards that you see in Age 1, that can be just a general rule of thumb for every age. In Age 2 and Age 3, there are 7 defense cards per age. So it's good to keep track of which defense cards you do pick up because it makes it less likely that your opponent can have 1 or 2, and it could decide whether you go for an aggression or not. Okay, did you know that a quarter of the events that you concede in Age 1 are colonies? A quarter. When put like that, it makes you realize how many events can be colonies. Cartography is a lot better than you think it is because of this reason. Here's another fun fact. Strength events is a very misleading term. I actually think that most of the events that are related to strength are actually weakness, aka Nostradamus is activated during these events. I call Nostradamus here the canon because if you want to have another way of looking at Nostradamus, pretend that you get an extra cannon every time you evaluate a weakest event. That should show you how broken he is when it comes to some of the nasty events like Reign of Terror. Almost no player can recover from another player having an extra cannon in strength calculations. So Nostradamus is quite the beast in the early ages, and you can confidently seed events like Reign of Terror or get at least one half covered with border conflict, uncertain borders, and crusades. He's very, very powerful for this reason. The happiness events are immigration and rebellion. Rebellion is the one that you need to really play around because it can completely wreck a turn of yours. Losing 2 civil actions is bad enough, but once in a while you get caught completely red-handed and you lose 4 or more civil actions due to unhappiness. The prosperity events are scientific breakthrough, good harvest, new deposits, and cultural influence. And the last one, if you're wondering, is knowledge of the ancients. These are neutral events. These are the closest thing you get to a neutral event if you're seeding something. And last but not least, we have the mutual destruction events, which are some of the most disruptive events of the game that can swing a game. I played a game recently where I got hit for rats for 10, and I did lose that game. That's something I can't recover from. So be aware of the breakdown of these events. I kind of listed them out here for your reference. But yeah, this is the first step to being a better player in this area is you have to know the cards by heart. There's just no way around it. This one I'm going to focus on today. Having a purpose when you make a decision. I come from a poker background, and a lot of students that I had a problem of just making an action without a reason. If you have a reason, now you can have an evaluation of that reason. It's better to seed an event or not to seed an event for the wrong reason and then find a way to correct it than to just do what you do without knowing why you're doing it. So this is probably the most helpful thing I can give you when you're learning how to get better at this area. Have a purpose. We're going to talk about different kinds of seeding. Tactical seeding is short term. Tactical seeding is trying to get the current event to show up and benefit you immediately. So a lot of common age A tactical seeding would be to get the rock to finish a wonder early or to get the science to research attack. I put the third one in there because it pays if you pay attention to your opponent and he takes a turn where he doesn't have an idle worker and you do. That's a good tactical opportunity to try to trigger free religion and get, in my mind, a pretty large edge on your opponent early on. So look for those opportunities and figure out if seeding short term can net you an advantage that's better than your opponent's. The other kind of seeding is strategic seeding. This one is less focused on the immediate effect of what's coming, so you're less concerned with what's being revealed, and you're more concerned with the event you're putting into the deck itself. So it's more of a long-term play. And I put some examples here. If you produce a lot of food, then you want events that take away population, even mutually, like pestilence. If you have a happiness wonder and your opponent doesn't, then it makes sense to seed happiness events. You get the point. And so these two kinds of seeding can be the best. If you get the best of both worlds, that is a very, very, very strong reason to seed. But there's going to be many times that perhaps the short term is good, but the long term thing, maybe the thing you're seeding is not good. And you have to weigh that with what you have in your hand. There's going to be lots of times early in the game with two military actions where you can only seed one event. And maybe that event's really bad for you long term, but maybe the short term is better and you can find a way to mitigate the damage of it later. There's going to be lots of these micro decisions you're going to have to make. And the only thing I can say is, again, think for yourself, take some risks, try some things out, and you'll get an intuition for it. There is an option not to seed, and many times it's probably correct not to. I've listed a few examples of why you wouldn't want to seed, but a lot of them have to do with future military tragedy. So if you're Hammurabi, you have the least amount of exposure, if you're using his bonus every turn, to getting a tactic or to seeing what's in the deck. Because you just are drawing one card a turn while your opponents are drawing 2 to 4, depending if they have a military leader like Sun Tzu. So Hammurabi, even if you have a safe event, and even if it could benefit you short term, it might not even be worth it to seed, especially into Confucius, Julius Caesar, or Sun Tzu, who will pretty much guaranteed always seed an event. You don't want to accelerate the deck unless you have a tactic and can have a military response to the decidedly unfriendly Age 1 event deck. I actually want to go as far as to say that if Hammurabi had a restriction that said you are not allowed to play military actions, like you're not allowed to seed events and you're not allowed to aggress with Hammurabi, and it was a restriction that was built into him, the win rate of Hammurabi would probably be higher with that restriction. I see a lot of Hammurabi players seeding into seeding and not having a plan for when the event deck for Age A runs out, and you get into all the nasty strength events for Age 1. Here are a couple examples. I'm seeding Wealthy 1 and triggering the last Age A event, which is friendly. The reason I'm doing this one is that I have put in 3 events that don't look at strength. So no Reign of Terror, no Uncertain Borders. They're going to be things like Cultural Influence, New Deposits, Knowledge of the Ancients, and maybe the Historic 1 territory. So this is an example where I was lucky to seed 3 non-strength events earlier, and by seeding this last event, even though it benefited my opponent who has Isabella and Colossus and Cartography, they're going to win this colony for sure. But I would rather fill the event deck with non-strength events, and that would buy me a lot of time in Age 2 in finding a solution to my military problem. There's a big difference in trying to one-up somebody in strength or just having the bare minimum to defend against an aggression. So I think the reason the pros outweigh the cons in this area, even though I'm seeding an event that long term will come back to bite me, because I'm giving Isabella a wealthy one usually is not a good idea. Here's another example. This actually happens quite often. There's one last event in the friendly Age A event deck. However, we're both at 1 strength, and I have priorities with my actions and my resources. I don't have time to even build 1 warrior. So if that's the case, even though I might have seeded strength events, like in this example, I still don't want to trigger this AJ event because I am not ready to increase my strength. And we know that whoever seeds an event wins ties when the event is revealed. So it's important to kind of have a timing of, if I seed this turn and the next 4 cards get shuffled and 2 of them are very deadly, if I lose the tie to my opponent, I need to increase my strength. So this is a good reason not to seed, even though our plan is to eventually win these events. So just pay attention to the event deck, making sure that when it runs out and all the friendly events are gone, you should probably not be even in strength or lower. Okay, and rule number 3 is kind of the beauty of TTA. TTA has a lot of inherent variance, and the military cards represent the most variance, because not only are there quite a few military cards, but there's a lot of hidden information. The civil cards that come down the row and the civil cards that we take and put on our tableau, I think that's how you say it, these are all things that, as you get better, you can predict what your opponent will do. There's nothing hidden about this. However, the military cards represent a lot of different things, and getting better at recognizing what your opponent is trying to do, what events they could possibly want to seed, especially based on who's military leader, right? It's very suspicious when someone who is not doing well in the military lead starts seeding events, because you need to figure out what they're trying to do. Something also that's kind of underrated, I would say, is that you can't play around everything. You can't play around a strength event. You can't play around rats, dark ages, and rebellion all at once. It's very difficult to plan for all these things. However, imagine you have seeded the 4 events that are coming up next, and you have complete knowledge of what you've done. Now you can play around just your events that you've put in there. So that knowledge is very powerful and can lead your opponent to some very, very brutal tragedies. Usually involves rats and dark ages more than pestilence. So I put on the bottom a couple examples just to kind of just get your juices flowing on some suspicious behavior on how to predict events. But the classic, I'm not taking something good on the card row that I could use because I just decide to pop twice. Well, you should be very wary of rats. And my personal favorite is not using breakthrough, because you should always use breakthrough unless you have some secret knowledge that going over 4 science might not be a good thing. I would respect someone not using breakthrough and assume that Dark Ages is in the deck. And last but not least, building temples is not really a good thing. So if you build a temple kind of randomly, the way I could say it is, you don't have corruption if you didn't build the temple, and you have other things to do with your rock and your population. This is a big read that rebellion or immigration is coming up, and in H2 there's more of these happiness events. So yeah, just wanted to kind of throw out a few of these examples, and I'm sure there's many more, but you get the point. All right, I hope that helped, and I'm happy to go and dig into more specific things. I feel that Age 2 is a lot more complex, and Age 3 as well, so I think I would want to devote time for a separate video for that. Okay, well, I hope that helped, and you can use some of this knowledge for your next game of Through the Ages.